Good morning, and I would like to welcome you to the awareness session for SMEs on the EU pharmaceutical reform. The event today is organized by EMA's SME office with the European Commission, and it's part of the agency's engagement activities with SMEs and their stakeholders. You will see some usual disclaimers here on the organization of the event. And today we're very pleased to have Lilia Lukianov and Anthony Rodiadis from DG Sante. Lilia and Anthony are policy officers in charge of the pharma package at DG Sante. And we are organizing this event today because we believe it's very important for SMEs and that they hear the details about the pharmaceutical package that has been prepared by the European Commission. Today we will go through the details of the legislative proposals, and you will hear quite a lot of details about the AAA, what has been named the AAA, the CCC, so challenges that have been identified during the preparation of the pharmaceutical package, and the solutions that are proposed to address these challenges and opportunities. You will also hear about the plans to streamline and simplify the EU regulatory framework and improve its predictability. Also, you will hear about how the proposals will foster pharmaceutical innovation and accommodate emerging technologies. We will also go through details about the incentives that are proposed for orphan medicines and AMR, where many SMEs are operating. Today we have over 900 attendees, so mostly SMEs, but also from the academic sector and the medtech sector. We have split the presentation in two parts with two separate Q&A sessions, and these will be moderated by Hélène Cassard and Leonor Enes. So we can move to the Slido slide. Yes. Thank you. We would like this event to be active, and we would like to invite you to participate through Slido. You will see the details here how to connect. Please send us your questions. So during the presentation, you don't have to wait until the end of the presentations. And if you can specify your affiliation where possible. I would like to thank the European Commission for helping us to put together this program, and the SME office, so Leonor Enes, Hélène Cassard, Thomas Balotti, Malika Holeman, Tatiana Molotkova, and also the big thank to the audiovisual team here at EMA and at the European Commission. Lilia, now I will give you the floor to go through the first part of the presentation, and thank you very much.
Hello, thank you very much for letting me speak on this very important topic, and I'm very happy to share this with all the attendees. I hope you hear me well. If not, please tell. So I will present a brief overview of the, of the regulatory process as it is now. I will explain a bit how and why we arrived here, and a bit the main priorities. That is going you face. Then we will go to the access, availability, affordability, the 3 A's indeed, with the main identifications of the problems and how we try to solve them. Then we will talk about the competitive regulatory framework, that is extremely important, and hopefully we will finish that before the break. So now we can move please to the next slide, the overview. So the first slide is really just the glossary. It's here for future reference, and if something is unclear for you when you follow the slides, I might indeed also sometimes use acronyms. We're used to it. If there is a problem in understanding, please refer to the glossary or ask. Next slide. So that's slide 5 about the the history. We have quite some history now in this area. It started with a big problem that we faced. That basically was a health scandal. Then we agreed that we decided that no product could ever be put on the market without the marketing authorization. That's how the system started. And then you see that there have been several changes, many adjustments. One of the big events was, of course, the creation of the EMA. And then the decentralized procedure that is fundamental to the functioning of the EU system in this respect. We have however not done massive changes since more or less 20 years, so that's going to be a full a review of the legislation. And I just wanted to bring here to your attention the fact that we are talking here about the main legislative act meaning the regulation, the directive, and also the regulations dealing with the orphan and with the pediatric medicines. I will with this timeline, I will then move now to the next slide, please. That is slide 6. About the life cycle of medicinal product. Why I want to show this to you is because, as you can see from the slide, there are many different pieces of legislation that are important today in this area. And we are changing here the marketing authorization base, which is regulation 726 from 2004 and directive 2001/83. However, as you can also see from other parts, as you can see from other parts of the diagram, some of the provisions that are not about marketing authorizations, that are, for example, about variations of pharmacovigilance, manufacturing, and prior to that also some preclinical test provisions, they are actually also in this main piece of legislation. So when you look at this graph, you really have a bit of an idea of how much is in this reform. So also as a brief element, you have more or less 400 articles, and the big part has been reviewed. I will mention here briefly that some of the parts have indeed not been reviewed in detail. That is the herbal part, also a bit the pharmacovigilance, but most of the articles have indeed been reviewed. Next slide, please. That is slide 7. So we do not change the responsibility sharing between member states and the EU. We indeed keep the same system where the authorization process can be initiated at the central level as well as the decentralized level. I copied here for you just a few points so you have it clear. The centralized authorization procedure is at the central level. The inspections of manufacturing sites also at the same level. Pharmacovigilance, of course, stays there as well. But for the decentralized procedure and mutual recognition procedures, it happens at the national level. Of course, the EU standards are also part of this piece of legislation. However, I would like to mention, because it's important for also the next slides and the presentation, the organization and delivery of the medical care, of course, stays. Health services, of course, stays with the member states, and the setting of prices and the reimbursement systems, of course, as well remain a national competence. Now, if you move to the next slide, please, about the a bit the political impetus that we had for this reform. We had the EU Pharma Strategy that was adopted in 2020. We had very bold ideas in mind already at that time. The objective was to create something that would be future-proof and would also be very efficient and supporting industry, at the same time promoting research and innovation, and of course keeping extremely high standards of security, safety, the one that we have in the EU, and for which actually the impact assessment showed a very good result and a very good appreciation by all involved stakeholders. Next slide, please. That is about the impact assessments that have been made. So here the slide is very short, but this is just to remind you that the reform was based on a very important consultation process that happened with stakeholders, with all the relevant in all the relevant fora, and the assessment of the proposals has been made in a very thorough way. Just also for you to know, there have been 2 impact assessments, one for the general part and one for the orphan and pediatrics part. You can find all of that on the website of the Commission. We would like to mention also that there are several assessments that have been done on competitiveness as well. That is one of the elements that we would like to mention. And now one of the last slides in terms of presentation, general overview, is the slide 10, is to present you about what was the package about, because there were indeed several things. So we had the new regulation, that is the continuation of the old regulation, dealing with the basically centralized procedure, the specific rules for the most innovative medicines, the shortages, security of supply, EMA governance, all of that. And you also have the new directive, that is the continuation of the old directive that continues to talk about the placing on the market of all medicines, the authorization and the labeling, the strong incentives for access, and many, many more. And an important point for you to know as well, the regulation on orphan and the one on orphans and the one on pediatrics will cease to exist, and the content has been integrated in mainly into the regulation, but of course some of the parts are also relevant, so therefore have been put in the directive as well. So you find that now in only those 2 acts. There was also a Council recommendation on antimicrobial resistance, so it was a proposal from the Commission for a Council recommendation. The good point here is it has already been adopted in June, and we are very happy about that. And there was a chapeau communication, a very interesting read if you want to have a general overview of the entire content of the legislative proposals. And now we can move to the slides which are on content. So we had 6 political objectives. There have been many changes. So if you go through articles, you will see that, as I explained, most of them have been changed. So indeed, I will not talk in this presentation about every single change, that would not be possible. However, what we can do is really walk you through how the Commission replied to the problems that it had observed through the impact assessment, and the replies that it tried to bring to those problems. So we had identified 6 political objectives. There was no single market. That was the outcome of the impact assessment. So for the access of medicine, we had quite some problem. There was a problem of shortages and security of supply, so availability issue. Even though, as I explained to you, prices and reimbursement and are national competencies, and that is not going to change, budgets are under big strains, and we needed to do something in terms of affordability and of course in the remit of the legislation. I will explain to you what exactly that is. We wanted, and that was one of the most important things, is the competitive regulatory framework, to have something in the EU that can compete worldwide in terms of efficiency, in terms of effectiveness and in terms of speed, in order to really enhance innovation. Then we have the environmental sustainability, of course, one of the main objectives of the Commission as well, in view of the Green Deal and view of the impact that the medicine can have on the environment and the direct impact that can have on health as well. And there the important point is checking, because the environmental sustainability was already in the legislation. However, there was a need for more checking, more implementation of rules, and going further. And then the antimicrobial resistance, I explained to you briefly that there was also council recommendations, but in the provisions themselves, we already have rules that are there really to help combating the antimicrobial resistance. So if we go to the next slide now, which is really about access to medicines. What I'd like to mention here is this figure that maybe you have seen or you have heard about. It's 90% variance between access in northern and richer, wealthier member states and southern, poorer or smaller member states. We indeed took figures from a range of years, calculated the exact timing that novel medicines that have been authorized at the centralized level, so the timing that those medicines needed in order to reach actually the patient. And based on that calculations, we came to the conclusion that indeed there was this 90% variance. And there was an average waiting time across the EU that could be 4 months or 29 months, which is really indeed a big discrepancy. So in order to fight this, we tried to do several things. One is indeed to work on the regulated data protection, and there maybe this slide will take a bit more time, but I would like to define certain words because that will be useful for the follow-up as well. The audience is big, and I'm sure most of the audience knows this, but if there is a question, I prefer to be clear up front. So the regulated data protection, what do we talk about? Is the period during which the data from the preclinical and clinical tests cannot be shared. So it's only for the innovative medicine, so the so-called originators, and they are protected from the competition. So the biologic, biosimilar or generic cannot refer to that data in order to prepare their own medicine. Then there is a market protection period that comes after this first period, and that is a period during which they can access the actual data, but they cannot yet place the medicines on the market. That is in order to allow for the information to be already used for all the preparatory work, but not to, of course, but to prevent from the competition, because indeed the originators are still protected. And then, not to be misused, there is another word that we're using, that's market exclusivity, and that is for the orphan medicines. So orphan medicines have something more, is a period in which the similar medicine even cannot enter the market. So it's not only the identical one, but a similar one, and that is indeed specifically used for the orphan provisions. So we call all of those incentives. So important to note here as well that this is not about patents and SPC protections. This is something else. This is not regulated by this piece of legislation, and we do not, change it in any way. If anything, the IP, the so-called IP protection, is actually getting better in view of the reform that is done in parallel by the Commission on the SPC, that is Supplementary Protection Certificate. So with those points cleared in the beginning, I would like now to explain to you about what we did when we say about moving from one-size-fits-all system to a system with incentives. So before, we used to have a system where companies would get this regulatory data protection that would be the same for all types of of medicines for the originators. We thought, based on the impact assessment and on the literature review and everything, that indeed and also there have been the calls from the member states asking the Commission to act on this problem. The 2 calls in Council asking for the Commission to solve the access issue. We decided to find a way in order to incentivize the company to actually reach the member state. And so instead of having this one-size-fits-all regulatory protection, we modulating it, meaning there is a conditional part and there is a general part. The general part will be shorter than it is today. And in order to reach the longer part, the companies would have to basically comply with the conditions that we put on them, which is basically of 3 sorts. I'll explain a bit more in detail later, but very briefly. One is about entering on all member states. The second one is about catering to unmet medical need. The third one is about doing comparative clinical trials, and there is also a possibility, to get an additional extension for additional indications. So for the orphans, we have more or less the same system, is a mirroring system, where indeed the protection is lower, and then it becomes bigger depending on the achievement of those objectives. In the end, that's important to note, the protection might even be higher than it is today if indeed the company manages to comply with the conditions that we place on them. And then I will, of course, explain in details what those conditions are a bit later. So I wanted to take a bit of time on this point from the beginning, because it's going to be an important one. With all these incentives, we calculated that there would be an increase of 15% in terms of access. And that means an additional 67 million patients served in the EU. So these figures, I hope are telling, and explain also our actions. Then, that's not the only point. We also worked on something completely different, but is also important in terms of access. That is about the market entry of generics. Once they are allowed to enter, they should also enter faster, quicker, and then there is the so-called Bolar exemption that is basically allowing the generics to prepare for the entry so that they are ready on day 1, which we harmonized. We also facilitate procedurally the life for them, for the generics and biosimilars, so they can indeed do their preparation quicker. We have the facilitation of repurposing of patent medicines. We have simplified procedures. I will walk you through this a bit later. So that is to, of course, so the pre-authorization support that we increase in order to allow for the companies to be better prepared so that they can serve the objectives better. The next slide, please, I think is the one that shows the availability challenges. So here I need to explain to you that indeed we cannot deal with all problems in this piece of legislation. I would like to also put it straight from the beginning, because indeed shortages have multiple sources of problems. It can be basically an issue of manufacturing. It can be an issue of over-dependency on certain countries. It can be a problem of diversification of sources of supply. It can be many things. So we would like to, in this piece of legislation, to do what is possible indeed, and we address that through different mechanisms. One is the improved coordination, monitoring and management of all shortages. This is really about everything. All shortages would be in a way monitored at national and then at central level. In order to do so and help this, there is also going to be an earlier system of information when a company wants to discontinue, for example, a product, or wants to sell it, or needs to stop for some reasons. There is also going to be a system that is basically based on prevention, in the sense that companies would have to have a shortage prevention plan that will basically detail which action and types of activities they will undergo if they have a problem of shortages. There's going to be also a union list of critical medicines. That's something else. That's for medicines for which we have identified a critical need. And there's going to be a stronger coordination for the EMA, member states, and the Commission. So this is all built, I forgot to tell you, of course, on the existing pieces of legislation, on the extending mandate of the EMA in this regard, also on the work of other agencies, for example, HERA, on other initiatives that are here also on the slide, like the IPSA in the area of health, or all type of horizontal measures. So the joint actions. So this is really one of the main priorities of the Commission, and we want to act in all different ways in order to ensure a consistent, a reply to this issue that we want to prevent shortages as much as possible and as feasible. The next slide should be the one on affordability. So I explained to you in the beginning what affordability means to us is really help member states and patients, for the patients that pay for the medicines from their pocket, to have prices that are kept at a certain level. What does this mean? It has to be affordable. And we identified several problems. Therefore, where, for example, lack of transparency on public funding that goes sometimes in the development of certain medicines. We also identified other issues. For example, there was sometimes a lack of coordination or sufficient coordination among member states, and we try to work on all these aspects. So one of the measures that we have is really to facilitate the earlier market entry of generics and biosimilar medicines. I talked about it a bit earlier, but here it's important as well, because if the originator doesn't reply to the obligations that we put on them, or to the incentives, then what will happen is that the generic will be able to enter quicker. I mean, it's not what we want, because there are no generics if there are no originators in the first place, so we understand the issue, but originators and generics are both essential for the functioning of the EU, and we want both to succeed. Then we have an incentive on generation of comparative clinical trials. I told you that this is one of those conditions. You get a 6 months extension of the regulatory data protection if you do those. And why it is important? It's because it's important for the HTA and pricing reimbursement authorities further down the line, in order for them to properly assess the pricing or the HTA qualities of a medicine. And we have a provision about the transparency around public funding that went into the development of any given medicine. Now I think we are going to the next slide, that's about the streamlined regulatory framework. So we indeed had challenges that were also found in the impact assessment. One of them was the longer approval times as compared to other parts of the world. For example, we have issues with the functioning sometimes, or for example, just to give you a simple example, the clock stock mechanism that is indeed useful to collect the data, but it is not useful in terms of the overall duration of a procedure. We indeed collected evidence also about every single detail in the system, and we tried to change it in a way that would be more workable and will also allow a quicker enter of products. So how I mean, the outcome of that is varied, but I will only talk to you about the most important points. So the most important ones are the following: the reduction timeline for the authorization of medicines. It went from 210 days to 180 days. That is for the assessment, so the scientific assessment, which is done, that's 15% of reduction, but for the commission part of the process, so the approval, it's even more, it's 30% reduction, because now it goes to 46 days. I will mention this here already. For the national procedures, we also reduced the timeline, but there the assessment time stayed the same, is the procedural, so to say, part that has been reduced. And we have the accelerated assessment, of course, of 150 days, so even shorter. But this is obviously for only certain types of medicines of major interest from the point of view of public health. But we do not impose this shorter deadlines without thinking about how this actually could be implemented and could be ensured. So we improved the EMA structure and governance, and here the example that I would like to give is the fact that from the previous 5 committees, we are now up to only 2 committees, the ones that we consider that have to stay, which is of course the CHMP and the track that is about the pharmacovigilance. We say that this will not, however, mean that there will be a loss in knowledge and expertise, because we maintain that expertise. We want it to stay in the network, and that will hopefully and for sure will be ensured through follow-ups, like for example the work in the groups. For example, I'll give you an example. For the orphan and pediatric and the advanced therapy medicinal products, the elements of their assessment will be fully integrated in the assessment of the CHMP. So the process will be shorter, but the expertise will remain. Then we have the simplified regulatory procedures. For example, what that means, there will be almost no renewals of marketing authorization. There will be also, I told you the possibility to introduce a stepwise and simplified PEEP for the pediatrics. And again, these are very minor examples, because the list could be very long. Then the digitalization now is the rule, meaning all the processes will have to go electronically. That's of course quicker. That is the objective. And we strengthened EMA's early regulatory support. I already explained to you briefly that will have an increased efficiency in principle, and just a brief element here as well. That support is not only the one that EMA is giving, but also the one that would now, for example, involve other authorities, like the HTA authorities. So you would, as a company, get an advice at the same time for the purposes of the EMA and for the purposes of the HTA, for example. So that would go in parallel. That means that you would be able to organize yourself quicker and be better prepared. With regard to the innovation, I will explain to you a bit in more details later in the presentation, but I already would like to bring to your attention some of the points that you might have seen in the press. For example, we introduced the regulatory sandbox, that is a testing mechanism for new regulatory adjustments. So it's not a pathway, it's something that would be specifically designed if a medicine, or rather a new type of technology, cannot be properly assessed if you only were to use the existing rules. So there, the Commission, based on EMA's assessment, will try to accommodate in order to let this be possible. Then we have the adapted frameworks, that is also for the medicines that need the special treatment, to say so, but is not before but after the authorization. So it's really something that will be either as a follow-up to a sandbox or separately, depending on the needs. So these are just examples, as I said. And now we can move to the next slide. I think is the one on environment. So I explained to you that environmental obligations were already part of the legislation. However, the impact assessment showed that there was not always a compliance. That we wanted to increase that compliance rate, and we wanted also to expand the era to some parts. For example, it also now covers the old products, the ones for which ERA has not been done in the past. Also, as I said, since we wanted to influence the companies in their ratio of submitting the ERA, it's now a separate ground for refusing a marketing authorization. So indeed, if an ERA that is brought to the authority is not there altogether, or is not complete, or if it brings elements but they are not sufficient in order to mitigate the environmental concern, then in principle the authority would be able to refuse the marketing authorization based on that criterion. So we want to show that this is extremely important to comply with this obligation. I told you that we also expanded the scope, for example, and one of that points is for the manufacturing of antibiotics. It also now needs to be part of the ERA. So there you would also go and see how the manufacturing works in terms of environmental responsibility and environmental risk. You assess those and you mitigate those if they exist. Yeah, the next slide, please, is about the antimicrobial resistance. That is the point that I was mentioning also before. So here, basically, the Commission had a global approach. The approach is the following: we want, at the same time, to push the incentive, so there is something that allows for the companies to want to invest in this area. So it's basically an additional incentive on 1 year, additional regulatory protection for a truly innovative product. So it has to be noted that it has to be a novel antimicrobial. Or, on the other hand, we also have, that is the so-called voucher, and I'll come on the details of the voucher later. We also have measures that we consider very important as well, because they consider the prudent use. And there it's about, the size of the package, it's about the information that you bring to the patient and to the doctors, and it's about the dispensation of the medicine, so on prescription. So this is the important part. So we now arrive to the details about access, and I was just wondering whether we are still in time, or whether we need to do the break now, ready for the questions. I'm asking the organizers.
No, thank you very much, Lilia, for this first part. Maybe we can pick up, make a break a little bit here.
Okay.
And maybe address one question we have received.
So yes, thank you, Lilia, for your presentation. We will now take questions from the audience on this first part of the presentation. And Lilia, you will be also joined by Anthony, policy officer at TJ Santé, for this Q&A session. So for the audience, if you did not raise your question yet, you can do it through Slido. All questions are welcome. There was also a question on the availability of the slides that are presented today, and just wanted to highlight the fact that they are going to be posted on the EMA website after the event, so they will be available. I will start with the first question that we receive, Lilia. And so can you please give some clarification in terms of timing for the pharma package implementation? Where does the legislative process stand today? And what are the next steps, in particular for SMEs? So, Lilia, please, if you could provide feedback on this question.
Yes, sure. So if you want to show the slide, there is indeed a slide on that, but we can front load it, and then that's going to be done anyway for the continuation of the presentation. So that's the last slide of the presentation about the legislative process. So we are now in the negotiation stage, which means that both the Parliament and the Council are working on the proposals. On the slide, you see that there have been already technical meetings with both the Council and the EP from our side. There is a rapporteur for the directive, and there is a rapporteur for the regulation. Their reports are out, and now the shadows have also given their proposed changes, and they will have to decide on that. And hopefully we expect this to happen somewhere in March next year for a first reading in April, which would be the last session of the Parliament. That's about the Parliament. However, the dates I'm giving to you are purely indicative at this stage from the Parliament side. So I cannot guarantee that this is what will happen, but that's the intention of the Parliament as it stands today. With regard to the Council, we only had one working party, and that was on the impact assessment of the general part, and we will have another one on the impact assessment on the orphan and pediatrics. And then the working parties on the actual chapters will start as of February or March, or there again, we are not yet completely sure about the dates. So that is the short timeline, and the longer timeline, because I guess it's what's important for you as well, is we can't tell, but in view of the elections of the new Parliament, probably it will stop for a couple of months, up to maybe 6 months, but the Council will continue its work, and that can take up to a couple of years. That's the usual legislative process, and here it's a bit more difficult because of the elections. Now, whether there's going to be a further consultation step, in principle, it has just stopped. It's not a consultation, it was a follow-up. So there was a publication on the Commission website allowing for everyone to express their position on the adopted regulation and directive. And we received hundreds of those. The deadline has finished, however, last week, I think. So there is no other legal way now of further consulting anyone in principle. However, the legislative process, as I said, has just started. So now everything is ahead of the EP and the Council.
Okay, thank you very much, Lilia, for this answer. So maybe now we'll take the second question. There is a question mentioning the fact that the slides mention a lower regulatory burden for SME. Can you please expand on that?
Yeah, sure. So there is also, if you said that you will share the slides from they're going to be on the website, so you will see further down in the slides more details on that, but I can explain to you what we mean. So the important regulatory burden that we think is going to be less important for the SMEs than for the rest of the companies is the deadline for the placing of the product on all member states. That is one of the conditions that I explained to you in order for a company to get the 2 additional years for the regulatory protection. So for that, a regular company to prove it will have 2 years, while an SME will have 3 years. So that is one of them. And that is a very important one. Then there are other things, like, for example, SMEs and non-for-profit entities are offered a support scheme. So it means, of course, you have the SME office, you already work with them very, very well, so you know that very well. But we have also the deferral of or waivers of fees, and that's going to stay, and that's going to be further, defined. We also have the regulatory, procedural, and administrative support based on today's systems. So yeah, that's it.
Yeah, and then we should. Hi, this is Anthony Rodiatis. I'm a policy officer working on the revision together with Lilia. I think just to address this question a bit also globally, there are various measures that make digital as default, which helps, all pharmaceutical companies, but specifically for those that are smaller, it gives an additional, let's say, assistance, because there's less of regulatory burden, quicker procedures, and this actually creates a more friendly environment for all these regulatory processes that are necessary to get the authorization and place the product on the market. And Lilia mentioned these, the reduction of deadlines, which I see there's also a question on that. The digitalization of the system in general, the less number of committees that are needed, and at the same time, all these pre-authorization regulatory facilitations, whether that is scientific advice or accelerated timelines, those are by default open to smaller companies, whereas that is not the case for the larger companies that also have more resources, etc. So these are important advantages if you are a small company.
Okay, thank you, Anthony and Lilia. So maybe now we can go to the next question. So, is there any aspect in this new pharma legislation that address the issue of availability of pharmaceutical products related to their price that is too low? Is there any plans to approach price increase of such drug?
Yeah, on this, the reply might be a bit insufficient from your perspective, but we cannot say, because when the price is too low or too high, that's an appreciation of a given member state on a given product on a given time. And we as Commission have no say in that at all. So unfortunately, really, I cannot tell. But in this piece of legislation would not be able to deal with this issue.
Okay.
That's unfortunately the response.
Okay, thank you. There's also a question that I wanted to raise, and that we've seen also in the questions coming up. We wanted you to explain today, if you could expand on the concept behind the regulatory sandboxes, because this could be a concept that is a bit abstract for companies. So can you expand a bit on that topic, please? Regulatory sandboxes. Thank you.
Yes, sure. So I mentioned briefly that this is a testing environment, but a testing environment that is secure. And but that, procedurally, what it means, it would mean that EMA will make a recommendation. So they will look at a certain type of product, so for example, a new technology, and then they will assess what adaptation to the regulatory framework would be needed in order for that product to be assessed. And then they will propose that to the Commission. Then the Commission will set the regulatory framework that it would be done specific for that specific product, rather technology, we think. And there you would have including the scientific requirements, so or the requirements for the development, or the appropriate clinical trials, or or the placing on the market, so anything. And you might potentially indeed allow certain targeted derogations from the regulation or the directive, or even the ATMP regulation, specified in that decision, and that will indeed be then monitored. And once the project is finished, in the sense that the product is developed, the technology is developed, then EMA will assess again, will see, okay, what should be done next. It can then go into the normal regulatory, pathway, or it can have an adapted pathway, the one that I explained to you before. So that's how we see it.
Okay, thank you very much, Lilia. Then the next question is the question on the list of critical medicines. So there is a question on when this list is going to be or expected to be available.
So yes, so as you know, the shortages and all the measures on shortages, and including the list of critical medicines, there are provisions in the legislation that will apply as of when the negotiations are finished. That's some years from now. At the same time, however, there is a lot of front loading because the security of supply and shortage was also part of the pharmaceutical strategy, and there has been a lot of preparatory work relating to security of supply. So there is now ongoing work through the heads of medicines agencies, the European Medicine Agency, and the member states together with the Commission, collecting through a certain methodology that is now builds on studies on shortages that we had some years ago. And basically, there is around 200 active substances right now that are being put together. And we are working towards having a first list of critical medicines that it's going to be validated from EMA, HMA, and Commission before the end of the year. This is going to be, as I said, a first list that would be a living document. It would be updated later on, and obviously when the rules of this legislation come into place, it will continue its life through building on the methodology and the work that has already taken place. But the goal is, of course, to use this list already before the legislation applies.
Okay, thank you. That's very clear. Then another question on the approval time at the European Commission level following the EMA opinion on a drug. So the question is a reduction in European Commission approval time following the EMA opinion also foreseen?
The answer is very brief, yes, and I mentioned it, and it's also in the slide. It's a reduction of 30% up to 46 days. Yes, indeed, and the same at the national levels.
Yeah. So there's a double reduction here. There is a reduction also for the scientific assessment, and that's all the work that happens in the EMA committees, etc. But there is a very important administrative process after the scientific opinion on the particular medicine is out, because a marketing authorization is an actual legal act. It's a decision. It comes from the Commission, and it's not just a rubber stamping. It requires certain steps where member states need to be involved, and I'm not even mentioning the translation issue, which is also very important. And both of these components of the timeline have been reduced. And as Lilia just said, the second component, which is the administrative component, is reduced to become about a little more than 30% faster than what we have today.
I saw two questions on the screen that I think are very important, if you allow me to reply on those.
Yes, of course, Lilia, yes.
Yeah, so I saw one that says, why would the company need to place all the products in all member states if it's not relevant? And indeed, I didn't mention it clearly because there was later a slide with specific conditions, but this is extremely important. Indeed, it applies to all member states in which the authorization is valid. Meaning that if it's a centralized authorization, it's valid in all 27 member states. So then the condition of the additional 2 years of market protection will depend on the placing on all 27. But if it's a national procedure that is so you have a valid marketing authorization in 2 or 3 or 5 or 15, then you would have to place your market in those 2 or 3 or 5 or 15. So indeed, you're very right there, and it's an important point. And the other one I wanted to comment, if I may, it's when you say, why do you think that 1 extra year would be sufficient for SMEs? Because they need a lot more time to find licensees, and so there I need to explain to you how we arrived to this timing. Why is it 2 and 3 and not 6 and 7 or whatever? The point is that we also need, so we are squeezed in time also, but what happens afterwards? So there needs to be a time and where the authority has to decide or whether yes or not this condition is complied with, and then after that then it's clear. It's clear for the originator, but it's also clear for the generic that further down the line could be preparing for the entry of the generic, so they need to know as well. And if we were to leave not 3 years but 5, it would then be very, very impossible for the generics to prepare for the entry if they only learn about that at that point in time. So that is the reason. We tried to go to the maximum of the period that we can in order to accommodate the difficulties of the SMEs that we know are real.
I've also tried, I'm also looking at the questions here that are coming in and maybe doing a little bit of a mind mapping, if I may. So maybe we can take some of these questions a bit more grouped.
Yes, of course.
So Lily, so just to see some questions here, maybe we can address a bit the launch requirements, the access requirements for SMEs, because there is, of course, I see some concern that smaller companies will not be able to fit with all the standards, the requirements, and even longer, 1 year of a longer deadline is a bit challenging there for companies. So there's a question, what can you give more or give a little bit of, is there leeway, let's say, for that? Maybe we should address that first. You can start and I can come in if you want.
So with the I have not seen the exact drafting, but it's true that we have not explained to you in detail how this placing on the market will happen in terms of practicalities. So what exactly you would need to do and show. So there has to be supply in the member state, but this is something to be assessed by each and every single member state, and that can actually translate into 4 different types of outcomes. It can be either a paper that says I do have the necessary supply, or a paper that says I do not have the necessary supply. In this case, however, in the second case, there has to be justification from the member state. For example, they never came to me, or they did come to me, but the conditions proposed were so overly not acceptable, and this is exactly why. Or there can be a silence. Basically, we have a provision that says that if for 60 days there is nothing that comes from the member state, then the so to say, the tacit approval is guaranteed, so for the benefit of the company. And then there is a last way, which is like active waiver, saying for this specific procedure I do not want to prevent the procedure from going ahead, so from the authorization for the additional 2 years to be granted, but I retain maybe the willingness to have the medicine later. So it's called a waiver. So we have those 4 possibilities, and of course we do not want to create more work. So if there is already a pricing and reimbursement authorization, certificate based on the Transparency Directive, that will do the work as well. So we tried to make it simple, even though it can appear as complicated, and the effort needs to be done from both the authorities in the member states and the company, because both have an interest. So that is the main element I wanted to mention there.
But just to say that, I mean, the market launch incentive is obviously something that is required if you want to have real access, like Lilia said. It is completely recognized that smaller companies don't have the networks, the distribution networks, or the resources to engage with the member states to achieve pricing decisions, etc. That's why, of course, the additional time, not just to place their products on the market, but also to prove that placing on the market. So that is there. Obviously, in the negotiations, the cursor might move. So I don't know where it will, in the end, be. It could be a bit more, but this is not in the Commission's hands, let's say. But the idea, of course, is to recognize this difficulty and to give additional time to smaller companies. But also you will see in the recitals that wherever it is, let's say, impossible to put a product on the market, because you might not have the center of excellence, or there might not be a patient population in that member state, that member state shouldn't be a barrier for that additional 2 years of data protection to be given. So I think this is recognized. Maybe, I don't know, we can go on with the presentation, and then we can come back, and then we still group questions. Nothing will be left unanswered, but in the second part we can come back.
Yes, thank you, Anthony and Lilia. Yes, I think it's a good timing to go into the second part of the presentation. So with access, and we started to touch upon a few topics already through answering some of the questions and we have received, and I would like to thank you to the attendees for engaging through the Slido. Thank you.
What we will then do now when presenting, we will try to not repeat what was replied in the questions and answers, and then we'll make the presentation maybe a bit shorter. So talking about access slides, so I think it's as of slide 18. We have the here graph, and it's really just for you to have it, to see it later or whenever, to understand the problem that we wanted to solve in terms of access. That is a table that was built on data that is from 2017, but the same trends continue to apply. So I will not stay there longer. The next slide is really a chart for you to visualize what we explained in terms of modulation of the incentives. We want to show here, I mentioned it at the beginning, but it's important to note that it can potentially go higher than it is today. And the conditions that we place there are basically conditions that are linked to the data and not to the market protection. Okay, that is something that sometimes comes as a question, so you have already the reply to that. Then the next slide is really about the unmet medical needs. That's something that we have not talked about, other than saying that you get an additional 6 months of regulatory data protection if you manage to produce a medicine that actually caters to an unmet medical need. And here, what we did in the provisions is to have a definition that is quite general, and we want it this way because we would like the scientific assessment of what it is an unmet medical need to be later done through guidelines by EMA. In discussions with other bodies, because there is an article that explains that would be done, taking into consideration all types of views, including the ones of the patients, including the ones of the HTA, including the ones of the wider society. So, but then if you really want to concentrate now on the definition, it's quite simple in the sense that you have one about the indication, so about the disease. There has to be a disease that is life-threatening and severely debilitating, or severely debilitating, and as a bracket, all orphans will by default be unmet medical need. And then, as regards to the treatment, you have to have something that has not been authorized, so there is nothing for it in the EU, or it has been authorized, so there is something in the EU, but the morbidity mortality remains very high. And then we have to look at the effect. Does this new medicine actually solve the issue? So it has to be meaningful reduction, of course, for the condition to play. The next slide, please, is really about the conditions, and I explained them already now in the questions, so I will not repeat myself. It's about the options that you have as a company. What do you bring in your file to claim that additional protection for the placing on non-member states, and then you have the options, and it also here clear that it's only valid for the member states in which the authorization is valid. Here the next slide is really just the written part of what I explained, so you have it for reference, also with the specific references to the actual articles. There is just one point that I would like to add here, because I didn't explain earlier. We have a repurposing incentive. That is something that we thought would be important to incentivize the industry. So it can be either, on innovative medicine or off-patent medicine. If you prove that there is an additional indication, you get then 4 years additional data protection for that specific indication only. Now, the last slide on this, one of the last slides on this access issue, we prepared a slide here with really the timeline, because sometimes it's difficult to understand exactly what and when you should be doing. The slide is here to show you that the entry indeed can be done very quickly, for example, but then it will have to be shown at the specific point in time. And why it is so? It's because we want to ensure that there is, at least during a certain period of time, supply. So medicine to appear to disappear the next day just for the purpose of obtaining the authorization. We want it to stay there, indeed, to be supplied on the market. And this is where also you see that the SMEs indeed have a longer protection period, but we could not go further because of the generic, as I explained to you as well. There you have some figures from the impact assessment, and I saw briefly a question in Slido about what would be the impact on the companies, and we calculated that impact. We thought that the simplification measures will really have a great impact, up to 204 million savings for authorities and up to 70 million savings for companies. You can see also here per type of reduction, per type of modulation, what will cost and what will bring basically a reduction. So we have some solid data, some calculations that are really thorough in the impact assessments. So we invite you to have a look if you are interested. It's all online. And now we are coming to the availability part. On the availability part, the slides are basically the details of what it contains, and you also have the references to the articles. I would like to mention here that we really need to see that there are 2 points. One is about shortages of all medicines, so how you at all times supervise this in order to make sure that the shortages do not happen, or if they happen, that you monitor them. And then there is another part that's about critical medicines. And as Anthony explained, there are several things that are happening for the critical medicines, including this list that is going to be issued this month. But we have already many provisions on the critical medicines in the actual legislation. So with regards to the shortages, the important thing I would like to mention is the marketing authorization holders and wholesalers. They will have to basically ensure continued supplies. That is an obligation that's put on them. That has an impact in the sense that they also have to monitor through shortage prevention plans what's happening within their businesses and what would happen in case of shortages. That's called mitigation plans. As I explained to you, that's very important. We extended the deadline, the period when you have to notify any decision of cessation of placing on the market, withdrawals, or even if it's a suspension, so temporary, and you have to tell it in advance so that there is some maneuver for the authorities to try and make the situation a bit less problematic in case it becomes problematic. There is a shortage monitoring both at the NCAs and EMA level, and there are requirements for the marketing authorization holder to provide documents when requested. Just a comment maybe here in order to front load one of the questions that maybe will come is that why to have a shortage prevention plan, for example, if the medicine is not in a shortage. We believe that it's not a problematic issue for any running company to have, even for themselves, just a mechanism of supervision. It doesn't have to be sent to the authorities. So it's not paperwork that we require. It's purely within the company, and only if there is a problem of shortages that this plan might be required, and then will have to be sent to the authorities. So that is something that's sometimes misunderstood. The MSSG, which is like a governing body dealing with the issue of shortages, can do different things. One is will work on the list of critical shortages, but they can also do recommendations in case there is a problem of shortages. Like, for example, they could for example say even that some stockpiling is needed on that specific situation in that specific case. But that's not something that we proactively put in the legislation, because it can even create shortages, so we do not want it as a measure by default. The next slide is really about how the information flows. So maybe I'll be brief on that one, just to say that sometimes there can be requests for information, and authorities and EMA and national and also the marketing authorization holders have to be in this flow of information. And also an important point, the shortages will be published by the NCAs and EMA, so it's going to be also known to everybody who is interested in the issue, because doctors and pharmacists and everybody need to know. Now, on the next slide about security of supply of critical medicines, I will not repeat what Anthony said about the list. And now this is really about the provisions that we have on the directive, in the regulation, because it was put in the regulation. So the Union List of Critical Medicine Act is there. So basically we're already front-loading one of these actions. We also have the MSSG recommendations that I explained to you for the shortages, but here's for critical medicines, and the role of the Commission, including the implementation of the security of supply through different ways. I think I will go now to the next slide, because we have still many to cover. So with regards to the affordability, briefly, you understood the problem, and we have several measures to solve the problem, or to help solving the problem. Broaden and harmonized boiler exemption. So there I explained briefly, but now I would like to enter a bit more into the details. So the generics will be able to prepare for the entry on the market that should happen on day one, and before there was sometimes some not harmonized application in different member states. Now they are able to do all the paperwork that they need for the actual marketing authorization, but they are also authorized to do studies and everything that is needed for the purpose of the HTA, and also for the purpose of the pricing and reimbursement. However, the actual applications for the HTA and the pricing and reimbursement should not happen. I mean, it's not said that it's covered. And of course, the placing on the market should not happen during the protection. That is obvious. We do not reduce the regulatory protection of the originator in any way through this measure. It's just that it should happen on day one. Then there's like smaller things but have a massive importance, like for example, the active substance master file. This is something that we created that would allow a company to refer to the data of the manufacturing, of the active substance without this data being repeated. And that also, there's an article also for the additional quality, so not only for the active substance, but for the other ingredients, and not only for the chemical, but for the others as well. So it's really wide. Then we have the risk management plan that is not required for generics. We also have the simplification of procedures that also have a higher impact on generics and biosimilars. And we have the recognition of interchangeability of biosimilars with their biologic counterparts. And I saw a question there, and maybe I can already put it here because it also helps. It's the reduction. We want to reduce animal testing, and there are two articles where we really we make it possible. So now, as regard the comparative clinical trial, I explained to you that this is something that that we wanted there in order to allow for the clinical trials, comparative clinical trials, to be brought to the attention of the authorities early enough, so that the idea when the authorities further down the line need to look at them. So the company gets an incentive of 6 months, but they produce something that was anyway useful for the authorities further down the line. So I think it's useful for everybody here, for the company because it gets an extension and because it gets a quicker approval, and also for the competent authorities in terms of affordability. Last one about the transparency and public funding. There have been sometimes discussions. So what we would like to achieve here is that all direct financial support. I'm sorry, I'm not saying next slide. So I hope whoever's changing the slides is following them, right? So because
33. Yeah?
It's slides 33. It's about the transparency on public funding. So, so all direct financial support provided by any public authority or publicly funded authority has to be reported. So this has to be received for the research and development, and irrespective of the legal entity who received it, it's for the for the medicine that we look. What is this useful for? Of course, for the authorities further down the line to understand what public money already went into a specific medicine and see whether they can take it into account for their pricing and reimbursement decisions. So now we get to the competitive regulatory framework part, which is maybe the most important for the companies, I believe. And we are starting here with incentivizing innovation by regulatory simplification. As we already discussed some of those, either by questions or because we touched upon them in different parts, I'll go quickly on the ones that we saw. So the reduction of timelines, already explained. Optimized EMA structure, we already explained. So the immature applications, what do we want to achieve here is that if EMA, and actually it's also working for the national competent authorities, if they receive a dossier that they consider as not mature enough, they would be able to refuse it in order not to stop the process and reopen it only when the data is there, and therefore making the process much longer. What we do here is that we give the possibility to the company by saying, look, this is missing. Either you provide it immediately, or we reject it, and then you come back when it's mature enough. And actually there is an interest in doing so, because then the timelines can be reduced in an important way, and also the authorities have a visibility on their teams and who does what and on which product. So then we have the regulatory support. We explained to you, but I'll go a bit further. So for the promising medicines under development for unmet medical needs, so the so-called PRIME, now it becomes part of the legislation. So if you one of those products, then you really will get a faster approval. You would also have coordination with the EMA already very much in advance. But we also have other things, like the ones I explained to you before. So if you want to apply for a marketing authorization and at the same time have already some information because you do it before, so you apply for an advice and then you want to have some advice as well on the HTA, EMA will be able to do it in parallel with the HTA authorities. So you will have the two advices at the same time. And the same works for the devices. I saw that there was a question, what do we do for devices? And I actually like to maybe front load it right now, because there is an important point. One is indeed we have this provision that says that we would be allowed to have a parallel consultation of so a parallel advice from both the medical device part and the medicine part from EMA. So that's one. But then we also have provisions that specifically tell you what provisions apply where and for which part, because of course the medical devices are regulated separately, in vitro are regulated separately, but when they're combined with medicine, we want specific rules to apply and EMA to be able to look at the product in its entirety. So for that, we have very specific provisions now in the directive that tell you exactly what applies when. And just a little addition there, we even go beyond. So for products that are not, a medical device, but could potentially be something else, there as well we have clarified the interplay between the legislations. We want to be really future-proof. It can be artificial intelligence, it can be something else. It would be part of the same, article. And then we have a scientific recommendation on regulatory status. If ever there is an issue, there is a possibility to get such a recommendation. And then we have the support for SMEs, as I already explained, through the deferral and reduction of fees, as well as with all the regulatory and scientific support. With regards to, so it's the next slide, the continuation of regulatory simplification. We have the use of real-world evidence, so that we have not explained yet. That would mean that now the authorities would be able to use real-world evidence, so data coming from the health data space, because we would now be the users, so the secondary users of that data. When we say we, I mean EMA, the authorities, and they would be able to use the data in order to assess the medicine, and also if data comes later, to reassess the medicines. So it's an important evolution there. I explained about the simplified requirements for generic and biosimilar. Here is the article about the methodologies to reduce animal testing. There was a question on that. So we indeed favor the reduction of animal testing, and we expect it should happen. We have the possibility for EMA to review data and phases. Of course, it's for specific medicines only. That's the so-called rolling reviews. I already explained the active substance matter file, the pharmacovigilance management plan that is not required. There is the abolishment of the renewals, and then I saw a question whether it's only for the centralized or also for the national. So yes, it's also for the national. And again, just check the articles about in most cases, because in some specific cases it's not the case. But it's very, very minor. And then we have now, it's slide 37. Again, the rest of the measures, the electronic submission of application, which was mentioned. We have, and that has not yet been mentioned, the use of electronic product information and multi-language packages. So the electronic product information could be chosen by a member state as a rule. And if a member state doesn't decide anything, by default, we still have the paper leaflet. So paper leaflet will stay there by default, but a member state can choose differently. We intend indeed to go digital, because that's the future, and that is indeed useful, including for the SMEs, for the multi-language packaging that then can circulate freely. It's less, in principle, less costly, easier to modify, easier to update. So there are many advantages in having the electronic product information. We have the facilitation of repurposing, and I already talked to you about the one that is done through, the additional data, so additional clinical studies. But when it's data is brought by non-for-profit entities to the authorities, then the EMA, for example, could decide on the variation. So they will change. They would add a repurposed use to that medicine, and then the product information will be changed accordingly through a variation process. We have a conditional marketing authorization for unmet medical need products specific. We have an accelerated assessment. A marketing authorization in exceptional circumstances is still there, and yeah, that is an important point. Decentralized manufacturing could help because you would not anymore need authorization for a decentralized site. So manufacturing authorization would only be needed for the centralized site. So less paperwork, less regulatory burden. Again, more useful for SMEs that, since it's more difficult for them. Then the last one is about the future proofing. I already explained to you briefly about the so that was on slide 38. I already explained to you about the regulatory sandboxes. I will not go there, but you have the articles, the adapted frameworks as well, the interplay between the technologies, medical devices, but there is also one about products of human origin. We explain what applies when exactly, in particular with the definition as well. And we have the platform technologies. I have not talked about this before. It's an important point. So you would now be able to have a marketing authorization for, to put it maybe in a non-scientific way, half a product. Because half a product will always be the same, but the remaining part will vary according to the pathogen or the patient population or the patient. And before it was not possible. Now you would have this possibility. So a platform technology would itself could potentially have a marketing authorization. That's an innovation as well that we think will be useful for future proofing. A slide on the temporary emergency marketing authorization. I will not explain to you the details because it's really for emergency situations. It's something that we learned from COVID, and we wanted to have this mechanism in place. Slide 40 is about the EMA structure. We explained to you already about the committees, the way that they are reduced and the way that the competence is kept. We are not going to go more in details here unless you have questions maybe. Then for the DCP and MRDCP procedures, the duration also has been reduced. I told to you that it has. We want to have the same effort both at central and the centralized level. However, the deadline for the evaluation remains as it is now, and it's the agreement that reduces. We also have something that will be helpful, that is the so-called opt-in procedure. It means that if a member state considers that for health reasons, public health reasons, it wants to basically join marketing authorization that's being given by another member state, it can opt in. It's a way for the member states to increase their access to medicines for which otherwise they might not get access, but also it's good for companies that might not basically not know that a member state would be interested, that they would request that the product is also brought to that other member state. Then we have the simplification of the repeat use procedure. No need to update the report if the member state doesn't require so also simpler for the company. And there as well we have the possibility to say for an immature application to come back with a specified list of documents to bring. Now I think we're already at the time where we should be asking the second part of the questions. So that's why I propose to the organizers the following. There are many slides, there are a couple of slides on the competitive regulatory framework for the supervision, controls and inspections, and for the manufacturing. I propose that we leave that for now, and then we come back if we have time. Okay, because all is written here, and if there are questions, we can also answer. And then I propose that we move to the environmental articles. And there I might be actually quite quick as well, because we already explained a bit. But I will still explain to you this slide. So for the ease of reference, it's slide 55. I have this slide there that tells you that indeed we have a standalone ground of refusal. And I explained to you that this is really meant to incentivize the companies to bring an ERA that is first complete, and second, that it is, if there is a problem, mitigating sufficiently the problem that is that was found. Now, we do not intend this article to be used very often. That is more of a a weapon to say if it happens, the authorities have this power. So the intention here and the message I want to pass to companies is this should rather be seen as an incentive to do the paperwork, bring the paperwork, rather than fear that the medicine would be not accepted because on a ERA ground. So I already explained to you that for antimicrobial products, the authorities will also have to assess the ERA in the manufacturing stage. So obviously for the dossiers as well, it's important to know. The EMA guidelines will have to be complied with. They're going to develop the guidelines and tell exactly how the ERA should be, presented, and this should be one of the conditions of the compliance. All the new information will have to be brought to the attention of the authorities even once the ERA is submitted. Of course, it has to be important information. And sometimes EMA would be able to impose a post-authorization ERA study if, for example, some specific elements are missing at that specific point in time for a reason that is brought to the attention of EMA. And then there is also it's like a parallel to the ground for refusal. You also have a ground for suspension, variation, or revocation of a marketing authorization in case of environmental concerns that have not been properly addressed. So I think I will stay with this table only because the other slides, so 56, 57, 58, they're really explaining more in details what I just explained. I'll go to 58 though, about the catching up procedure. So for the medicinal products, they have been put on the market before 2005. We will not request all the ERAs now. EMA will do an assessment, a prioritization, and will tell for which products ERAs have to be submitted first. And this will be like a rolling exercise. Eventually, in principle, all of the products would have to submit at some point the ERA for assessment. It will not happen at once. That's something that I want to front load already as a question. Yeah, there are articles about monograph that the NCAs and the agency will have to set up active substance-based review systems of ERA data, which is called ERA monograph. So then it will be more easy to use them and to refer to them, so less paperwork again. So now, yeah, just a point on the GMOs. There are two important elements to mention. We want to align the GMO, requirements with the authorization, medicinal products authorization requirements. Do not double the work. Require the same, and we basically refer to it in a way that is actually compatible with the medicinal product. So that is the main element that you need to take from this this point. There again, hopefully, that will reduce the burden also on the companies. And now we're coming to antimicrobial resistance. And since Anthony is here, this is his baby. Maybe I'll let him present this.
Sure, thank you very much. On antimicrobial resistance, essentially there's two strands of measures that are being brought. The first one is about prudent use measures. So that means how can we use our existing or old antimicrobials as efficiently as possible, only when it's required, and so that we don't contribute to resistant pathogens. And this, in the directive, there are certain rules that have to do with prescription. For instance, all antimicrobials, even topical use antimicrobials, are placed by default in the prescription status of medicines. This would then require medicine prescription to get access to those medicines. There are recommendations to member states to also have national measures requiring testing before an antimicrobial is prescribed. Packages being having the size that corresponds to the usual therapy, awareness for the patient and for the healthcare practitioner, and most importantly, a new measure, which is the inclusion of a small antimicrobial resistance awareness card in the packages that would be separate from the leaflet, so that would kind of create a surprise or a little bit of a highlight, let's say, in terms of information to the patient about the importance of the resistance and the fact that this product needs to be used with a very specific way. So those are the prudent use measures, and that would apply in the directive. On the other hand, we have a market failure. So yes, the prudent use measures. So we have a market failure, which is about antimicrobials are not being developed, or new classes aren't being developed, and the pipeline is unfortunately very thin. Just to give an example, we haven't seen new classes since the mid-'80s, essentially. So there's many ways, or there's a toolbox we can use to incentivize the development of such products. Smaller companies are very helpful in this regard, because it's usually smaller, more niche type of groups that would invest in high risk products where there is no return or guaranteed return of investment. So in order to increase the value of such an investment, and also to facilitate access to revenue or investments from third parties, what we propose a transferable data exclusivity voucher for any new antimicrobial that basically corresponds to certain criteria, whether it's a new class of medicines and contributes to the reduction or really basically reduces resistance and contributing to combating AMR. So if certain scientific criteria are fulfilled, that product would receive the right, through a voucher, of extending its own data protection by an additional year. But more importantly, this right is a sellable right, so it can be sold one time to any other company on the market, presumably a company that has a higher volume, a higher price, and for which this additional year of data protection would have a much larger value. And in our impact assessment, we basically calculate that if you have a one voucher on the market, the value of such a voucher would be between 200 and 300 million euros. And that would be, let's say, a reward for a successful product in this area. Obviously, there are a lot of conditions that are linked to getting this voucher. There needs to be transparency about how much it's sold. There are certain access requirements attached to it, but it is one of the measures that can help the EU finance these products and finance its own fair share, because obviously other countries will be doing, or should be doing, their part in AMR. So essentially, in the next slides, you have a breakdown of what the transfer and validity requirements are and conditions. I'm not going to go into that because it takes a bit time to go into the details. But I'll just mention that this measure, given that it has a high cost for health systems, you can consider it a pilot measure. So it's only available by default for 15 years, unless the co-legislators decide that it's working well, and then we can potentially prolong it. or it's there until 10 vouchers are given in total. So whichever of the two comes first. And this is really to also address concerns from member states that, this is an expensive measure that would put pressure on public budgets. Now, in slide 63, it's also about prudent use measures. One thing that I didn't mention earlier is the antimicrobial stewardship plans, which is a requirement for any antimicrobial producer. Basically, when at the moment of marketing authorization, to say, what is my plan to monitor the resistance of pathogens to my particular product, and what risk mitigation measures I can take for that. So this is something that is, let's say, a new element there. And that would conclude the antimicrobial measures. So.
Yes, and so we can go a bit over the time. I see from the organizer. So we will then go and present to you the orphan and pediatrics. So for the orphan and for the orphan medicine, or medicines for rare diseases, I explained to you that the principle that we apply is the same. They are by default unmet need, but they get an additional protection if they're high unmet need. They are also getting an additional protection if they're entering in all member states, an additional 1 year of market exclusivity. And we showed here on the slide, it's 66, all the types of regulatory protection that is attached to any of the given conditionalities. One important point to mention here is that for the well-established use orphan medicines, there is only a 5 years protection period. The reason behind is the well-established use is the medicine that has not run its own clinical studies but refer to the data, to publications, so to bibliographic data. Therefore, we consider that 5 years should be enough. So I will leave the other details here. And we'll go now to the definition. So that's slide 67 of high unmet medical need. Here you will see that the definitions are a bit different. The parts in red are the changes as opposed to the unmet medical needs. One important disclaimer also before, this is of course in negotiations with the Council and the Parliament, and certain wording or certain definitions can still evolve or be modified. But on this slide, what we try to do is to we wanted to achieve medicines coming for chronically debilitating conditions. Established use product I excluded. I explained to you that they get the 5 years data protection, but they cannot be high unmet medical need. And then how they compare to the other medicine. Indeed, the same condition as before. No medicine is authorized in the EU, but if there is a medicine, the new one has to bring an exceptional therapeutic advancement, and this is more than significant benefit. And that the guidelines again, because you're going to ask, but exactly what does this mean? This is going to be defined, like for the other one, for unmet medical need, by the EMA guidelines. And in the definition of the EMA guidelines, the EMA will be in contact, will basically have the words of stakeholders. HTA, processing universal bodies, patients, industry, everybody, basically, because this is indeed a very important issue. And then we will look at the effect criterion. The use of the medicine needs to result in a meaningful reduction in disease morbidity or mortality. So this is like for the unmet medical need. Now going to the main changes. So we hope that through the market exclusivity modulation, like for the general medicines modulation, we will improve access. That is the incentive behind. That is the intention behind. However, with the high unmet medical need, we expect that innovation will also be brought to the market because it is very much needed in this area, even more than in other areas. So the orphan addressing a high unmet medical need would then benefit from 10 years market exclusivity. And there on the slide there, it was on the 66. I think you could see that it can go up to 13 years if all of the conditions are met. Yes, and then there is this important element to say that the global market exclusivity principle will apply in the same way as we have it for global market authorization. Then we have on slide 69 some other changes. So for the orphan designation, you're going to see adjustment to scientific progress. This is a criterion that has been put there. However, we deleted the insufficient return on investment criterion because it was not useful and also was difficult to implement. We also have provisions on the validity of orphan designation, 7 years. That was also an innovation. Before there was no such thing, and so this is a procedural simplification, we believe. So I will leave it here for other details because we're really coming to the end of the presentation, and I want to walk you through the SMEs articles. As regards pediatrics, so the important point to know is that the pediatrics provisions, unlike orphans who are only in the regulation, pediatric provisions are both in the regulation and in the directive. And here in the slide you have the exact articles or chapter, so you can navigate in, because indeed this has been absorbed, so you might want to understand where they are. The centralized marketing authorization procedures is compulsory for the Puma medicines, and optional for pediatric only medicinal products, so with only pediatric use. As I said, there is a possibility for a stepwise PIP and a simplified PIP. What is the idea behind? We want a PIP for everything. That is the purpose. However, we understand that sometimes it might not be feasible, not be even good for the development of the medicine. So there, the conditions are explained in the regulation. We can have an approach where documents are submitted as they are built, basically, and as they appear. There is a mandatory PIP on the basis of a mechanism of action of a medicinal product. But you can have a temporary waiver from a PIP in case of emergencies. We hope that's going to be rare. Next slide, 71. We have a cap on the length of deferrals. We also have a 6 month SPC extension following with the PIP completion. And this is also for orphan medicine. And I want to say that this is, for example, different from what the US have, where you don't have such an automatic extension of your IP protection. So that's very valuable. Increased transparency of PIP conducted for discontinued medicines. Why it is important? It's really if other, even non-for-profit organizations or other developers would learn that the medicine has been discontinued, for example, not because it was not showing any progress in terms of science, but just because of it's an important reason, but because of, for example, financial situation of a company, they could follow up and they could maybe continue the research in this respect. We also have a procedural provision about who is monitoring. So EMA is responsible for agreeing on the PIPs with the appropriate CHMP body. And we have the amendments of clinical trials regulation to reflect the current timing publication of summary of the results. So there are several changes. If you know the articles and you look at them, you will realize that many have been adjusted indeed, and there are several procedural facilities now. So with this, we're coming to the SMEs part, which is so it's slide 73. We we would like to mention here that SMEs have been seen since the beginning of the review as an important pillar of the pharma, industry. Why is this so? Because they are the ones developing sometimes the most innovative medicines, because they take the risks, while sometimes the bigger ones do not. So SMEs and in general companies of a smaller size are important for this revision. So what we did is we tried to simplify the procedure as much as we explained for everything. But for SMEs, they should have a bigger impact. That was our assessment. Now, we also have a support scheme specifically designed for the SMEs. It's the regulatory, procedural, and administrative support, and the reduction deferral of waivers. I just want to mention here, even if it's not exactly for the non-for-profits association, we would also have the same kind of support and referral and deferral of waivers. So we want to increase this interaction with the smaller or even non-for-profit, part of the industry. So with regards to the SMEs, the scheme covers pre-authorization procedures, and in particular the scientific advice, but it also covers everything that happens afterwards. And for sure, the SME office, you know it well, works on all these aspects, including with this kind of sessions. As regards the waivers and deferrals, so a procedural or a legalistic point, they are still in the Commission Regulation 2049/2005, and they are going to be in the revised fee regulation that is under revision now. So you would have to look the procedures there in both of these parts. Then, with regard to the special measures for the SMEs, I know we explained to you that this is 3 years instead of 2 years, but I would like to here just mention one point. It's not only SMEs. Actually, it's the SMEs within the meaning of the SME regulation, Commission recommendation, but it's also undertakings that basically only have 5 centralized marketing authorization, either them or the group. And that's why, because we want to expand it a bit, so it's a bit more than just the SMEs. However, we of course do not want circumvention of the procedures by big groups. So that's why it's 5. With this, the measures is greater impact on SMEs, the unmet medical need, the articles, the orphan medicinal products, the products with a major interest from the public health perspective. We have this impression that this could potentially come more for SMEs than from general or from big pharma, and we would like to enhance as much as possible the regulatory system for the SMEs. So with this, I think we finished the presentation. I'm sorry it was very long, but we are happy to take your questions now.
Dear Lilia and Anthony, thank you very much for this very informative presentation. So indeed, as you've mentioned, we can extend till 12:15 this session to allow to address the more number of questions as possible. Also, what I would like to tell to reassure our participants is that we will share all this presentation. We understand that it's important that you further look at it to digest all of these information. And what I would propose now is that to try to go into the questions in topics, in blocks, so that we can try to address them as much as possible. And maybe then, because we have this question on ERA, maybe we can take the ERA questions. So maybe
and I can summarize a bit the aspects. So, the questions we're seeing on the environmental risk assessment, first of all, is about what is it about? Is it about the enforcement of ERA? What is behind the ERA? And also, there's some questions about, what about those old products that are on the market? Do we have a plan as to the deadlines, etc., that the ERA needs to be assessed? And maybe on this, we can also potentially look at say a couple of words on the 3 R's principle and how that was also accommodated. So I don't know, Lilia, if you want to start.
Maybe then you do the 3 R's.
Yeah.
Okay, so on the ERA, I will start with the easiest one, with the one that whether we already have a plan. On this, I will really refer you to Emma, but I think that you do not have yet a plan on basically prioritization, because it's too early. It's simply too early. The legislation is not even in place. However, a smart way of doing it, if I were in your shoes, I would simply look at my portfolio of products and see from the available data that I already have or that is available publicly, whether this is a product that has an important effect on environment, because indeed there are different levels of nocivity, so to say. I'm not going to, this is definitely not a scientific word, but it's just the way I can explain it in one word. So you could maybe start looking at indeed at your products and see and try and identify those that potentially would then end up on being on the priority list. And if it's the case, then you just front load the work by preparing already for it. But unless I'm mistaken, and my colleagues can correct me, I don't think this is decided. Then, with regards to what is behind the ERA, as I explained again, the idea, and this really has to be clear in the minds. We want errors to be there at all the time. So there should not be any situations anymore where there are no errors at all, or where they are so incomplete that they are basically irrelevant that you cannot possibly assess and have any meaningful information out of them. Or if they are indeed situations where you need to reduce the risks by changing some of your production's method, manufacturing practices, and then you do not do that, you do not propose to do that, or change some of the any aspects in the technology, then it would be problematic. However, it's not meant to take from the market a product that has been there just because in the meantime you have not yet submitted the ERA, because Emma has not asked you to do so yet because it's an old product. You see, so there is always a reasonable level of expectation.
Yeah, okay. So basically, those older products, there has to be a prioritization, as Lilia mentioned, and there's a plan foreseen for that, but the plan needs to be developed. And then the 3 R's principle, it's a principle that is recognized now in the legislation, in the marketing authorization provisions, and basically what it says is that if it is possible to apply the 3 R's principle in a marketing authorization to prove safety and efficacy, this should be used. But obviously, this is not a hard requirement because if it's not possible, then you can't do it. So, but it is recognized as a principle in the legislation. In the next block, I don't know if you want to mention it, and then I can summarize it.
In terms of the enforcement, would you like to add something on the enforcement aspect?
Yes, I mean of ERA.
Yeah, so it's simple. Basically, there is indeed a way of penalizing a company that would not have either provided an ERA at all, or provided an ERA that was incomplete. So even if AMA requested additional documents that have not been provided, so incomplete, or with mitigation measures that are considered as being insufficient. In this case, indeed, the authorization could potentially not be granted based on this specific ground of refusal, right? And then the corresponding measures is for the life cycle. So once the product is on the market, if there is evidence showing that there are risks associated to the air, to the environment, and that has not been mitigated, there again, potentially the authority could revoke the marketing authorization. But this is really the heavy artillery. we hope that will never be used. That is the intention of the Commission. The intention of the Commission is not to not let the medicines enter the market or be taken away from the market. The intention of the Commission is that the environmental issues are taken extremely seriously and are taken seriously sufficiently before, not years after. So that is the idea.
Yeah, because we have currently an enforcement issue. I mean, even today, the environmental risk assessment is a requirement, and since 2005, but we can't enforce it today. So this makes it more enforceable.
Thank you very much. And then now I propose to go to the topic, to the block of the pediatric
yes.
medicines. Yes.
And this is indeed, I think, the most popular block at the moment, from what I see. There is here a bit of a comparison with the United States, the pediatric investigation plan, whether it is something that is that needs to be mandatory or not, and why. I mean, maybe I can start. Lydia can come in here. Essentially, the pediatric investigation plan is, first of all, an administrative procedure that where the company essentially says how it is planning to conduct clinical studies and trials that would investigate whether or not this product and its mechanism of action can work in pediatric populations. So I don't know why, is it the cost that is behind the reservations that we see here in the question for SMEs? Because the plan in itself doesn't have a big cost. Maybe the trials that are attached to it do. But to answer the question, was it considered to delete the requirement? The short answer is no, this was never on the table. And the reason for that is that, in the EU, there is a political decision that, if there is possibility to investigate the possibility for a medicine to work in pediatric populations, this should happen. And the statistics behind this support that, in the sense that, 70% of orphan diseases originate in pediatric populations, for instance. And of course, we recognize this comes with a cost, but of course there is also a big reward, because after the successful completion of a pediatric investigation plan, according to the PIP, there is a 6-month SPC extension, which is also the same case in the United States, which then becomes would be there to reward the company significantly for that additional investment. And sometimes, I might add, clinical trials might not be needed to successfully conclude the PIP, because you could have extrapolation from clinical studies conducted in adults, if that's scientifically possible. I don't know, from our side a bit, why is this question? Do the companies not want to investigate pediatric indications? That's something that at least in the EU we want to definitely promote. In terms of exceptions for SMEs in the US, I don't think there are exceptions in the United States for SMEs specifically, but at least in this case, the PIP is a requirement for all medicines.
I don't know whether maybe there was a misunderstanding with the question. Maybe what it's meant is that in the US, a PIP is not compulsory for orphan products, but also there is no SPC of 6 months automatic. So we make it compulsory, but you get automatically the SPC protection, which is very highly valued protection. So we believe that this is fully rewarded in the sense that the investment that is done, the money that it costs, it should in principle be recuperated.
Yeah, but in the United States, there's also the 6-month extension after the PIP is concluded as well.
Yeah. So, but it's not compulsory. So if you don't do it, you don't get it. So the thing is that we think that was the exception that you referred to. But if it's something else, please correct.
And there's a related question here for the pediatric use marketing authorization. I mean, this is. This basically has to do with older medicines, right? Medicines that are on the market for which a pediatric indication is developed. And there was a question, I think, about incentives on that. I mean, there is an incentive for pediatric use marketing authorizations whereby this additional indication would get 8 years plus 2 years, so in total 10 years of regulatory protection as an incentive to develop pediatric indication. So that's indeed part of the system.
Okay, thank you very much. Would you like to cover, in terms of topic, would you like to cover the repurposing, or shall we go to the next question?
Just a short reply, because it's very short for the prime. I wasn't clear. It's any of the 3 conditions. It's not the 3 conditions.
Yeah, sorry, if you can repeat the question.
So in the last slide, it is not clear if any of the 3 conditions are to be met to be eligible for prime. So I'll just check the slide just to be sure what we have.
Maybe we can take that block and then we can answer this. So the questions here on unmet needs and also high unmet needs. There are some questions that are asking to see, what are the conditions for unmet needs and high unmet medical needs, and whether or not products that are not complying with those conditions, can they get also access to the pre-regulatory support and to prime? So the logic, both for unmet needs and high unmet needs, is to have a criterion-based definitions. These are definitions that set the general frame, but it needs to be further elaborated from a scientific point of view from the agency, where it needs to say basically, okay, but from a scientific point of view, how are these criteria fulfilled? So for the unmet medical need medicines, we have 3 criteria. The first thing that is asked is, are we talking about a medicine that addresses, well, first of all, that is seriously debilitating or it's seriously debilitating or life-threatening condition. So essentially, this is the first criterion. And then the second question is there other medicines on the market that essentially address this seriously debilitating or life-threatening condition? And if the answer is no, there are no other medicines, then that's fulfilled. But if there are other medicines on the market, then the question is whether or not there is a remaining high morbidity or mortality even after those medicines are taken. And the third criterion is whether or not this new product actually has a desired effect. Does it actually reduce the morbidity or mortality? So all these 3 criteria need to be applied cumulatively. So you need to have yes as the answer to all these 3 to be able to be considered an unmet need. If you're an orphan medicine, then you're automatically considered unmet medical need. Now, the questions, what is morbidity, mortality, does it sufficiently address, etc. These are scientific and they need to be elaborated, possibly also depending on the different indications. So that would be additional work after the legislation is in place that has to be also in place to reply to that, and the agency would be responsible for developing. In the high unmet need area, there's a similar logic, but with a higher bar, with a higher requirements. So again, you have seriously life-threatening, seriously debilitating, etc. But you need to have a higher, let's say, effect on those. So for those medicines, because there was a question about ultra rare diseases, those products would get additional market exclusivity, which is a different set of incentives. And the medicines for ultra rare diseases, etc., would potentially go there.
If I may just on this, just to make sure that I have not been misunderstood, because I checked the slides and indeed we don't have this slide on prime, because the question was on prime, whether for prime all three conditions are to be met, and actually prime it's Article 60 in the regulation, and no, you have to be in one of the three categories. So that's why I said no, you have to be in one of the three categories. But then we don't have the slide on that. So I don't know why the question refers, but just to be clear, Anthony spoke about unmet medical need, high unmet medical need, then you have to collect all the conditions. But for prime, in order to be a prime, you have to be either an unmet need or a high unmet need, or you have to have a major interest from the point of view of public health. So it's one of the three. And the conditions, as you saw, are not exactly the same. So indeed, if you qualify for one of those three, then you are eligible for a prime support, regulatory and scientific.
But not everything can access prime. You need to be some kind of a priority either through those three entryways that
Exactly.
mentioned.
Thank you for the clarification. I can see that indeed the participants are still there. So I would propose to have the last question. And since we have not mentioned the committees, maybe could you address the question, will the CAT remain separate from the CHMP? So what would be the future of the committee, the CAT committee?
So there's the current 5 committees that we have are reduced to 2. So the remaining the only committees available under in the new system would be the PRAC, the Pharmacovigilance Committee, and the CHMP Committee. All the other work that is done in the committees that are now suppressed is going to happen on expertise basis, following the rapporteurship system that we still have today. But that work will be done in working groups. And these working groups would not be at committee level. And the memberships in those working groups will be depending on the expertise required for that particular marketing authorization. So, because you don't necessarily need to have an ambassadorial committee to discuss advanced therapies, where every member state has an expert. You need expertise, on the other hand, that is specific to that product, and that would need to be selected from a roster of expertise. Of course, when this preparatory work is finished in the working group level, then the application will be discussed in the CHMP, where there is an participation from all member states and patients, etc. So the control still exists, but that control happens one time, not 5 times.
So just to be extremely clear, the assessment will happen within the CHMP.
Thank you. Thank you. Very clear. So now I propose to stop with the Q&A and I pass the microphone to Konstantinos to finalize the session. Thank you for very clear responses.
Thank you. I think we went a little bit over time, and I think it was very much needed. And first of all, I would like to thank all attendees for posting questions and comments to us. I think that was very good to stimulate the discussion. I would like to thank Lilia and Anthony really for the presentation and the Q&A sessions. I think it was really useful to going through the details of the package that is being prepared and that is now under with the Parliament and further on with the Council. I think it was very, very useful for SMEs to hear the rationale and the background for all the measures that are envisioned with the proposal and what exactly the EU regulatory toolbox will look like. So in terms of the post-event type of activity, so the slide deck will be made available on the EMA website. It's a very, very good slide deck with a lot of details that have been put together by our colleagues at the Commission. And we also post the video footage for use after the event. So that's for the actual event of today. And just now, I will take the opportunity to highlight SME office activities that are planned for 24. So we are currently finalizing a revision of the SME user guide. And so that will be published in early 24. And we are also looking into organizing dedicated SME info days or webinars like the one we had today. And we're looking into really, again, running a webinar on what the EMA does in terms of support to SMEs. So looking at the SME registration, SME support. And we're also looking into a dedicated info session on medical devices in relation to the EMA activities. So you will also receive a small short survey for this event. And also in terms of survey, what we're looking into next year is to try to profile SMEs which are operating in the pharma, but also in the medtech sector to gather more data and information on medical devices and also emerging technologies. So we would like to get some feedback from you on that. I think this is it. If we don't have any other comments here in the room in Amsterdam or in Brussels with our colleagues, I think we can close the meeting. And I would like to thank again everybody for this very useful webinar today. Thank you.
Thank you.